are you ready? Ready to dig into a story that's got political intrigue and big money? We're talking a battle over the future of the UK countryside, and it was all sparked by a massive solar farm project.
What's so interesting about this is how this dispute that seems like it's just a local thing about one solar farm in Lincolnshire, it actually exposes these major fault lines in UK politics and the whole approach to clean energy in the country.
Yeah, okay, so let's set the stage then. Our main players are Ed Miliband, the UK's Energy Secretary.
Right.
He's been pushing so hard for that clean energy transition by 2030. And then we've got Dale Vince, who is a millionaire green energy entrepreneur.
Yes.
But he also happens to be a major labor donor.
Yeah, he's given millions of pounds since 2021.
Okay, so millions of pounds donated to labor since 2021.
That's right, and that's where things get a little bit tricky.
Okay.
Miliband just approved Vince's project, this massive 524-hectare solar farm called Heckington Fen.
That's huge.
It is, and it's causing a lot of people to be upset.
Yeah, you'd think. I mean, I'm seeing all these headlines, green zealotry and the countryside being trashed and stuff. So who is upset and why?
Well, first, you've got local residents who are worried about the impact on the landscape, right? The impact on their community. And then on top of that, you have politicians, mainly from the conservative side, and they're accusing Miliband of, playing favorites with a donor.
Right. Okay. Yeah. This is where Nick Timothy comes in, right? He's the conservative MP who is really going after Miliband and claiming that he violated this thing called the Ministerial Code. So what is that? What's that about?
Basically, the Ministerial Code, it's a set of rules that are designed to prevent conflicts of interest in the UK government.
Okay.
So Timothy's argument is that Miliband's decision to approve the solar farm was probably influenced by all of Vince's hefty donations to the Labour Party.
Right.
And, it might look bad even if there wasn't some sort of quid pro quo situation.
Wait, hold on. So even if Miliband truly thinks that this solar farm is a good idea for the country, it's just the fact that it benefits a major labor donor, and that's what makes it suspicious.
Exactly. Even just the perception of a conflict of interest.
Right.
That can be as damaging as an actual conflict because it undermines public trust in the government's whole decision-making process.
Right.
And that's why Timothy is demanding an investigation into this. He wants to know if Miliband broke the rules.
Okay, so we've got people yelling foul play on one side and then claims that this is all just a smear campaign on the other side.
Yeah.
So what are Vince and Miliband saying in their defense?
Well, Vince is arguing that the project will create jobs and that it will help the UK achieve its climate goals.
Okay.
And he's pointing to the fact that the government itself, has committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2050. Solar power is a key part of that plan. So it's not like this is some rogue thing or, outside of that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So what's Miliband saying?
Well, he's basically doubling down on his commitment to renewable energy. He sees the Heckington Fen project as a vital step towards a greener future for the UK, and he's insisting that his decision was based solely on what he thinks is best for the project and not, political donations.
But wouldn't it be kind of smarter for the government to avoid even the appearance of impropriety in this case? Especially when you're dealing with something as sensitive as energy policy and climate change? I mean, it's just making them look bad no matter what the truth is.
Yeah, that's a really good point because, the way this looks right now is not great for Miliband or the Labour Party in general.
Yeah.
And it definitely feeds into this narrative that we're seeing about out-of-touch elites, pushing green agendas without actually considering what ordinary people think about it.
Yeah, it definitely feels like that sometimes.
Right.
So even if this project goes ahead, gets approved, the controversy around it could damage public support for solar energy.
Oh, absolutely. And that's something that anyone who actually cares about tackling climate change should be concerned about.
Right.
Because if people lose faith in the government's ability to manage that transition to a clean energy future, it's going to be a lot harder to achieve those goals.
Yeah, that's true. So what does this mean for, me? For just the average person in the UK? What's the takeaway here?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that we have to be critical of the information that we're taking in.
Okay.
Especially when it comes to politically charged issues like this one. So don't just accept those headlines at face value. Dig a little deeper, consider the different sides, and then you can form your own informed opinion.
And what about this Ministerial Code thing? Should we be worried that powerful people can just ignore these rules or whatever?
Well, the Ministerial Code is only as effective as the people who are supposed to uphold it. So
Oh.
if there's no transparency or accountability, then it becomes a lot easier for conflicts of interest to just go unchecked.
So you've already given us a lot to think about.
Mm.
Where do we go from here? What other layers of this story do we need to kind of look at?
Well, one thing that jumps out to me is that this isn't just about one solar farm in Lincolnshire.
Right. This is about a much bigger debate that's happening in the UK and across the globe, really.
Yeah.
We're talking about finding that balance between our need for clean energy and those concerns about how that transition is going to impact local communities and the landscapes that we love.
So it sounds like this Heckington Fen controversy is just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. Think of this solar farm as a microcosm of all the challenges and dilemmas that we're going to be facing more and more as we move towards a net zero future.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my interest. Let's dive a little deeper into those questions and see where they lead us. This is getting really interesting. Okay, so we're talking about this bigger picture of transitioning over to clean energy. But practically, what does that look like for the UK? Well, Miliband has set these pretty ambitious targets. Like, he wants to see over 100 million solar panels installed in the UK by 2035.
100 million.
Yeah.
To put that into context, is that like enough to cover an area larger than Birmingham or Manchester?
Yeah, than most UK cities.
Wow. So that's a lot of solar farms. That makes this Heckington Fen project seem kind of small.
It does put it into perspective for sure. Heckington Fen is just one example of these kinds of large-scale projects. We're going to see them popping up across the country in the coming years.
So that brings us back to this question then. How do we balance the need for clean energy with those concerns from local communities about the impact that it's going to have on the landscape?
Yeah, it's a tough balancing act for sure. There are valid concerns about losing valuable agricultural land, the visual impact of these massive solar farms, and then the disruption to local ecosystems too.
Right. And it's not just about how it looks either. We need to be thinking about the money side of things too.
Yeah.
Like, will these projects actually bring those jobs that people like Vince are promising? Or will they end up pushing out existing industries and livelihoods? And how do we make sure that this transition to clean energy is fair and benefits everyone?
Yeah, those are the questions that are going to become more and more important as the UK moves towards a net zero economy. And honestly, there are no easy answers. It requires careful planning, open dialogue, and everyone being willing to compromise.
It also makes me wonder if the UK is even ready to handle all this solar energy.
Right.
Do we even have the infrastructure to manage it all?
That's another big piece of this puzzle.
Yeah.
We need to invest in upgrading our grid.
Mm-hmm.
We need to develop energy storage solutions and make sure that the energy that's generated by all these new solar farms can actually get to the people who need it.
So it's not even just about building solar farms. We're talking about creating a whole new energy system.
Exactly. And that requires long-term vision and commitment to investing in the necessary infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
It's a massive undertaking, but it's essential if we actually want to achieve a truly sustainable energy future.
Yeah, this is giving me a lot to think about. It's like how this shift to clean energy might play out, not just on a national level, but in like my own community.
Yeah, and remember, this transition is already happening. It's not some future thing. It's happening right now.
Speaking of things happening right now, there's another layer to this story that we haven't talked about yet. Dale Vince, the solar farm developer and labor donor.
Yes.
He recently criticized Labor's stance on airport expansion.
That's right. He publicly slammed their decision to back a third runway at Heathrow,
Wow.
arguing that it just goes against the party's commitment to net zero.
It's pretty bold to criticize the party that you're giving millions of pounds to.
It is. It definitely makes you wonder what this says about the relationship between Labor and its donors. Does Vince have more influence than we realize?
Right. It's got to be raising some eyebrows.
Yeah.
And it also kind of suggests that maybe there are some cracks in Labor about how to actually reach net zero. Are they willing to make tough choices, even if it means going against those powerful interests?
Okay.
Okay. So we've got all this tension between clean energy and the impact on communities. We've got questions about infrastructure, political influence, and now we're seeing possible disagreements within Labor itself. So where does this leave us?
It leaves us with more questions than answers, but that's not always a bad thing. It means that this is something complex and it deserves our attention, and we should be looking into this.
I'm also thinking back to what we were talking about with the Ministerial Code
Yeah.
and the importance of transparency.
Right.
This whole thing with Vince criticizing Labor while also being a big donor. It just adds another layer to the question of, was Miliband's decision on the solar farm truly impartial?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if there are things going on that we don't know about. Are there backroom deals? Is there more to this story than we can see right now? These are the questions that journalists are going to be digging into, I'm sure.
Well, I, for one, am totally hooked. This is starting to feel like a political thriller. Okay, my head is spinning a bit.
Yeah.
We've covered so much from this Heckington Fen solar farm to the bigger picture of switching to clean energy.
Mm.
It's clear that this isn't just a story about, a local planning decision.
It really isn't. What's so fascinating to me is how this one event has brought up so many of the tensions and problems that we face when it comes to dealing with climate change.
Right.
It's about balancing the need to protect the environment with the economy, navigating all these political interests, and then figuring out what to do about the concerns of local communities.
Yeah, and there's not just one right answer, one solution that's going to make everyone happy.
Right. There are trade-offs and compromises everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to have these conversations. Engage with the different sides and try to understand the challenges ahead.
I think what's really hit home for me is that all these decisions about energy, about where we build solar farms and wind turbines, they're not just abstract things being debated by the government. They have real consequences on people's lives, the places where we live, and the future of our communities.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And that's why it's so important that people are informed and that they understand what's at stake.
Right.
And that they make their voices heard. Because the choices that we make today are going to shape the world that we live in tomorrow.
So where does this leave us then? What's the takeaway for our listeners who are trying to understand all this?
I think the big takeaway is that there are no easy answers.
Yeah.
This change to clean energy, it's going to be messy and complicated. There's going to be arguments, compromises, unintended consequences.
But we can't just give up.
No, not at all.
Right.
What it means is that we need to be involved, we need to understand what's going on, and be willing to have those difficult conversations.
And we need to make sure our leaders are actually doing the right thing.
Exactly.
We need to make sure they're actually doing what's best for people and the planet, not just doing things for powerful donors or pushing agendas that don't help anyone.
Yeah, I completely agree. And remember, you don't need to be like a policy expert or a scientist to make a difference.
Right.
You can start by learning about these issues, talking to your friends and family, and making sure your voice is heard.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening for me. I hope it's made our listeners think about the choices that we face and how they can engage with these issues.
I think that's a great way to wrap things up. Thanks for having me. It's been great talking about this with you.
The pleasure was all mine. And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep the conversation going.